Alright, everyone, we're about to start listening to Rebel Eaters Club Episode 2, Part 2, and I'm going to take a moment to... So, we're going to go back about 30 seconds-ish, just to help lead us into what they're talking about. And then I want to set this to 1.5 speed.
Feel this pressure to radically transform themselves so they can just be acceptable, worthwhile, fully human. But it also feels deeply racialized. The women in these movies who could get thin and then get loved were almost always white. And years later, I realized starving myself wasn't just about being as thin as possible, but being as close to whiteness as possible too. Bailey says she always knew that was part of the deal for her.
I honestly really explicitly did have that connection in my head. I'm half black, half white. My mom's side of the family is the white side of the family. My dad's side of the family is the black side of the family. I'm like relatively light-skinned. And honestly, as soon as I started like visibly restricting, my aunt was like, Bailey, why are you trying to look like a white girl? Like that connection was made really fast. Ultimately, I was trying to adhere to like white heteropatriarchal ideals of beauty and had this like idea that somehow like being more white would make me more safe and would make me more desirable. And I mean, ultimately, I just lost a bunch of my hair and that didn't make me particularly desirable at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think back on what happened to me in childhood where it was primarily boys emotionally torturing me day after day after day and trying to force me through this abuse to submit to their expectation that I be the right size. I now realize in adulthood that I was getting two lessons at once. I was getting the lesson that I should be thin, but I was getting the lesson that if I was desirable to boys, I could be safe from abuse.
Yes.
They're the opposite sides of the same coin.
Yes. So,
I say this not to discredit her experience, and I want to be clear about that, but I say this because she equated sexual motivations to a 4-year-old in her book, which I don't like and I have a problem with. But how old were you when this was going on exactly? I think her argument could be made if she's talking about middle school. Then, yeah, to a degree, I see a little bit of what she's saying, because middle school boys will still often pick on girls that they find attractive, though. So, like, that's a well-known trope for a reason. Sometimes kids do pick on those that they like. They also pick on those that they hate. It's kind of hard to create, I don't know, there are kids that literally for, like, there are kids that love to play devil's advocate even in elementary school, and oftentimes there's another kid that just has such a problem with the devil's advocate kid that they will not curse them out or anything because they understand that they are still in school, but like will start yelling at the devil's advocate kid. Because they find it so affronting that how dare he disagree with the rest of the class. It's just, again, I think this kind of boils down to an intolerance of differences. And, while fatness definitely resides in that realm, it's not only that realm. And for the if you're sexually desirable, then you're safe. How old were they? Again, I really need to know that. How old were these kids? Because after she equated sexual motivation to a 4-year-old, I have a hard time believing any of her inferences as to the reasons of behaviors against her. And as for Bailey, I don't have a huge amount to comment on because it feels a little out of my depth, but that whole getting thinner, you look like... why are you trying to look like a white girl, was something that Michelle McDaniels, whose YouTube channel is My Thoughts Will Probably Offend You, she's kind of recounted that in some of her videos too. So as far as I know, that was something that was experienced, where in certain cultures within the US, being thin is equated with whiteness. So I don't really have a whole lot to say on that because it's out of my depth. But as far as I know, that was something that was considered. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with this. But I just want to say I've heard that before.
I feel like a lot of kind of like the everyday violence that men direct at women often has to do with deviating from like the set expectation of like what an attractive, good, whatever, malleable woman is. And like a thin, quiet white woman. And I've never been any of those things. I have always been like a bit of a weirdo, loud, kind of a know-it-all. Definitely a little eccentric. Just like a freaking weirdo. I've been a weirdo my whole life. I'm
But
into
also
it.
deeply charming.
Thank you.
For the record, though, people will see you as weird even if you're quiet. There's the weird, quiet girl that doesn't talk. That was me. Like, just a weirdness. Like, it isn't quiet, good, loudness bad, just as it's not thin, good, fatness bad. Not to the degree that they're saying. Like, there's probably some underlying factors in there. For example, if we look at fat versus thin, I will take a nice fat person over a mean skinny person any day for like a friend or something. But people like Marissa that equate their fatness with a form of oppression piss me off. So there's some underlying features as to why people may or may not like you, I guess is my point.
Like, I'm into it. It's part of my identity. I've always been this way. And I've always received like a large amount of pushback from that. And so I was like, okay, I've tried to be less weird. I can't be less weird, but I have not tried being more thin and more white. Maybe if I adhere to these expectations in other ways, I'll be safe from this abuse. That was definitely a lot of my thinking. And ultimately, I was still deviant, wasn't safe, didn't super work out extremely well for me.
One of the things that creeps me out so much now that I'm not restricting is that of course, it was unpleasant to be exhausted and irritable, all the things that chronic hunger creates, right?
Yeah.
Like, really physical discomfort, exhaustion, irritability, all this stuff. But I remember feeling in the depths of my physical weakness from hunger, this sense of femininity that I never felt.
Oh, yes.
And it was so powerful and so intoxicating to me. That weakness, that frailty was a sort of coveted and prized experience for me. And it felt very exotic and special and whatever. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I was like, oh my God, I'm fainting like a Victorian woman.
Yes. But which is so tied to that white feminine ideal.
Oh, yes.
Well, and I think I don't know, forgive me if I'm overstepping, but like I think that for both of us, the white woman ideal was very present in our
Oh,
homes.
yeah. Yes, very much so. Me and my little sister, we didn't really grow up around my dad's side of the family. We were only around extremely thin white women. And that was just like the way I wanted to be. I just wanted to be like I said, a fainting Victorian woman, small enough to be easily kidnapped.
Wow.
Like the type of person you could just throw over your shoulder and rescue or kidnap or leave with a dragon. Like,
Yes.
small enough to be easily contained. Like, that's what I was like, oh, I feel so like beautiful and feminine. And even though all my hair is falling out and my skin is terrible and I have constant diarrhea from chewing sugarless gum, I feel so sexy and feminine.
Yeah, I'm thinking about...
Okay, one, that feels like a little bit of a stretch and a signal of deeper issues, but I would like to note that the thin paleness of like Victorian and Edwardian women was often a result of tuberculosis. Like, it was resulting from an illness. And there's plenty of like unhealthy behaviors that are still lionized now, but we're also still so here's the thing. Yes. For fashion, for like this idealized beauty, it's often to achieve that in reality often is the result of unhealthy behaviors. But this effect, Tess Holliday is not a good example of healthy behaviors either, though, which is what a lot of fat activists and fat acceptance people promote. I think that perhaps instead we should advocate for healthy behaviors and just healthy sizes. Not necessarily thin, but that doesn't mean that you should just eat whatever you want either. Like, I think focusing on healthy behaviors and healthy eating as, well, that's never going to be in vogue. Like, not in vogue, not fashion in vogue, because part of what fashion is built on is the unusual. It's that hard to attain thing that you don't see very often. That's why avant-garde pieces get so much recognition and stuff. It's because they're unusual. They're avant-garde. So that's never going to be something for fashion. And part of the reason why someone like Tess Holliday does get work as a model and does get noticed and put on covers and stuff is because while it's not the typical unusual that fashion goes for, it's still an unusual thing that you don't see very often. So it still fills that need in the fashion industry to a degree. And this way they can get social justice points while they do it, even though I think that it's complete bullshit. Anyway, that's my thought.
Who historically has benefited the most, it is, the closer you get to that white ideal, that thin ideal, the more access that you're going to get, right? Relative to, of course, white dudes. But I kind of want to return to the concept of living with an eating disorder, coming through it. Like for you, what was the breaking in the clouds moment for you? Did that happen internally or was it external?
So it was a combination of both. So I was hospitalized a couple of times. Hospitalization is super effective because it sucks and you're like, I would do anything to not have to do that again. I also was starting to have issues with my heart, which still kind of carry through to this day. And I got to the point where I was like, I'm going to die. Around that time, and I feel like this is such like a niche Bay Area experience, but whatever. I took mushrooms for the first time. And I had this moment where I was looking at myself in the bathroom mirror and I was like, I have so much love for this person. And I'd never had that feeling before. And as soon as I came down, that feeling went away, but I knew I'd had it. That really was like a turning point for me. And like right after that, I like graduated from the various programs I was in for my eating disorder, started on an antipsychotic medication. And after I was put on medication, I gained about 130 pounds in 1 year, which was like a jarring experience, I'm not gonna lie. But basically, I'm at the point that like even when those feelings come up, I'm like, what am I gonna do? Lose 130 pounds? No.
Right.
Like, that's not gonna happen, so fuck it. Do you know how long it would take you to lose 130 pounds, Bailey? Not fucking worth it. So I'm gonna love myself here.
Yes.
In a way that I never have when I was thinner. And it's awesome.
Totally. I mean, when we met, you were already aware of fat activism and fat acceptance. I'm curious about your introduction to it.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure. I feel like my introduction was probably through Tumblr. Like I was big into Tumblr when I was in high school. And I also, because I'd like been through this whole eating disorder journey, there were like little...
So, a couple of things. One, I'm glad that she was able to overcome her eating disorder. I find it concerning that the medication that she was on cost her, well, it's not that medication caused her to gain 130 pounds, but it's like, I guess perhaps her doctors were happy it wasn't going in the opposite direction, but I feel like something could have been done there to help mitigate that wasn't done. Number one. Number two, her thing saying, it's a niche bay experience with mushrooms. Honey, plenty of people do mushrooms. Number two, this was only in 2020. It's not like mushrooms were this unusual thing. And that I'm glad that you experienced that intense love for yourself that caused you to make a shift, and I think ultimately probably a better shift for you in your life. Like you do realize that that's part of what drugs do, right?
Little bits, like there were like a couple of people who I ran into who were like doctors or psychiatrists or psychologists who were like, hey, like there's a different way to look at this. Then I, like when I was around 18, I want to say, I had this like group of friends. We were like very alternative, very queer, even though I was still dating men and saying I was a lesbian. And we had like crazy colored hair and wore all black and like just kind of like talked about like our various, like, I don't know, our various intersections of oppression. And it was this moment where I was like, I'm fat, I'm a freak, I'm queer, and I love it. Like, I just got really into it. And that was, I feel like when I started to kind of build this like internal self-esteem where I would just like pump myself up all the time, post so many selfies on Facebook and Instagram and just be like, I'm so fucking hot. Like, look at me with my like mostly shaved head with like a kind of troll doll blue thing happening on top and my full face glitter and all this shit. And I was like, yes, I'm into it. You're into it. Y'all are fucking into it.
Yes, totally.
And I feel like that was really kind of the beginning of my like my real self-acceptance. And like self-love, like fuck accepting yourself. I love myself.
Yeah. What is it like being in this space of self-love and especially around body and food and living in a house where there's this active disordered eating happening?
Yes. Well, I have had to set some really strong boundaries. And I feel like those strong boundaries that I've set have honestly been helpful to everyone.
So these are boundaries you sat down with.
Yeah, I sat down with my mom and my sister and was like, here are some things like I'm not okay with. And if I'm going to keep living with you guys, I need these things to change. It was the sort of situation where like me and my little sister would only eat when my mom wasn't home because she'd like always say something.
Right.
Like even if it was just like, oh, what are you eating? that still was just like, it felt so weird. It
Yeah.
was like, I'm just eating. Like, or like, oh, are you going to have all of that? Aren't you going to save some of that? Like, I was like, we need to stop having this food interaction. I also need everyone to stop telling me to lose weight, to stop suggesting ways for me to lose weight, and to stop telling me that any of my other health issues would be better if I lost weight. And I've had this conversation at this point. We've had it a couple of times. And in general, my mom and my sister have been pretty receptive. They're trying.
I guess like I'm thinking about how you're 22, I'm 37, and you have had all of these extraordinary realizations that it took me a really like much longer time to have. And I'm wondering if, do you feel like there's something generational about that? Do you feel like you're in a generation where there are just different attitudes or more tools, or
I absolutely agree that there are like more tools, and that the attitude towards like the way bodies can even be is like changed a lot since like even like the early 2000s when I was in like middle school. I'm like technically I'm like at the
I would agree with this. If we look at a lot of the fat activists, even on TikTok, most of them are Gen Z. And I think, I actually don't really know what to make of it. I get the feeling, as much as I talk out about against like the fat acceptance, fat liberation movement, I think it's going to enter the cultural zeitgeist and stay eventually. Not because it's legitimate, but because there's been this shift in perspective, this weird shift in perspective that it's like there's been call-outs against, racism, ableism, homophobia, like legitimate issues, that it's overgeneralized by the vast majority of people, that now that anytime anyone claims oppression, then it should be taken like 100% seriously. I just don't think that like neopronouns are, and when I say neopronouns, I'm not talking about they, them, I'm not talking about Zer. I'm talking about bun, buns, and bun self. It used to be called otherkin, back on Tumblr back in the day. But it's those where it's like, no, that's batshit crazy, but I feel like given a few generations, it will enter the cultural consciousness and it will stay there for at least a good long while. And it's because people have overgeneralized and sadly don't seem to make the distinction between genuine issues of racism, homophobia, and ableism and ageism and all those like legitimate protected class isms and this shit. Like, it feels like a lot of people can't make the distinction. And the thing is that with, fat acceptance, fat liberation, they do have a couple of points that really should be brought in. So I think that that's maybe the other thing, is that because there is a kernel of truth to their words, in that doctors don't always do tests that they should because they assume that the patient just needs to lose weight, and then later it turns out that person has cancer that went undetected because the doctor didn't run the test. That's a legitimate issue that needs to be addressed. Any fat people that are actually harassed, and I don't think it's as prevalent as is said on social media, but I do think that it still happens. That should not happen. And I think it definitely still happens in schools, but I can tell you, as someone who works in an elementary school, we do our best. We do our best to put an end to that shit because we don't like the kids attacking each other for anything physical. Or, well, for anything in general, but more nuance and education on how to talk through your issues happens more if it's like ideological differences. Which sounds weird coming for elementary school kids, but it does still happen. There's kids that believe that giving like any sort of form of criticism is mean and bullying, and then there's kids that are like, no, he asked me advice, I'm giving him advice, and so that just requires a different touch. But there are still issues with kids picking on each other for physical differences, and as educators and as an adult in space with children, I do my best to put an end to it, but there's only so much that I can do. There's only so much that we can do. They still go home to their families where it's not always reinforced, And in that way, their movement has a kernel of truth to it. That doesn't mean, though, that they face oppression, systemic oppression. It doesn't mean that shops not carrying cute clothes in their size is a form of oppression. It does not mean that me posting before and after photos on my social media is a form of oppression.
At the edge of millennial and Gen Z. And like Gen Z is just trying to like fuck shit up, like in a good way.
Yeah.
Like the world we live in is not working on so many levels and it
Yes.
needs to change. We have been completely divested of the American dream. And so there is definitely a freedom in that to like restructure and recreate. And I think that's awesome.
As someone with a history of ED, how does it feel to hear people talk about or endorse aspects of diet culture?
I mean, honestly, it fills me with rage. Like that is one of the few things where I like my face will get hot, like my hands will start shaking because I know diet culture impinges on people's personal freedom.
Yeah.
Diet culture is a fucking intellectual muzzle that prevents specifically women from like realizing their full like psychic, intellectual, everything potential. It's a method of subjugation. It's a brainwashing tool. Diet culture is what cult leaders do to cult members, depriving them of food, depriving them of energy, depriving them of sleep. Diet culture is on a certain level like someone speaking into a microphone in your head all the time because it's the only thing you can think about because when you're not eating, the only thing your body wants to do is eat.
So here's the thing. I think, with all respect to Bailey, I think her perspective is skewed because she had an eating disorder in the past. Her mind took it to a further extent than most people's minds take it. Like, it doesn't consume a lot of people's thoughts. If they go on a diet, it's not this all-consuming thing. I think her perspective is a little skewed and I think her view is a bit extreme and is only reflective of her experience. So if where she is now, she's far happier, great. I'm glad that she recovered from her eating disorder. It's not that way for a lot of people.
Because you need to eat. And so it never lets you be alone with yourself and your own thoughts to realize all of your potential. And that's what enrages me, is it's like, it is like at the very core, a brainwashing technique to force the subjugation of women.
If I could drop our mic because it's not attached to a very heavy thing, I would. I would drop both of our mics. That was amazeballs. Thank you. I had to ask Bailey one more question about what life is like from the other side of recovery. What does she have to say to the person who is still finding their way out of diet culture?
Imagine a world where you can eat whenever you're hungry, that you don't have to think about what else you've eaten that day. Imagine being able to go to the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk and get a fried Twinkie. Like, you can have that. That is within reach. You can do it.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. I love that. There is nothing wrong with your body. There's nothing wrong with your body, no matter what your body looks like or what it can or cannot do. No matter if you have a chronic condition, whether you will live 100 years or 80 years or 30 years, your body is wonderful. It's a miracle. It's magical. You are magical. I know that for a lot of people, it's hard to believe that. I get it. Diet culture has hurt all of us so much, and it takes time to recover from it. Lots of time. And for some people, it takes serious medical intervention. But in case you're ready to hear it, even just a little bit, I want you to know that you are precious beyond measure. One part of this conversation really stuck with me when Bailey talked about living with her mom and sister, people who are obviously very important to her, but who have very different relationships to food and their bodies. That got me thinking about this week's journal prompt. Here it is. Bailey says she had to make some rules with her mom and sister about how they talk about their bodies and about food when she's around. What are the new rules you would love to set for your family or friends, roommates, coworkers about how they talk about food and bodies? If you want to write down your thoughts, you can send it to us at rebeleatersclub@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 862-231-5386, and your story can make it onto the show. 862-231-5386. When you're done, don't forget to give yourself the merit badge you earned. It's the You Are Stardust badge. You can print it out on our website, rebeleatersclub.com. Next week, I'll be talking to psychologist Deb Burgard about her life as an original fat activist and why we should stop controlling how we eat and just play with our food.
If most people felt safe enough, what would we do with food? You know? And we would play. And,
Yes.
we would just do all the things that human beings do when we're playing.
Rebel Eaters Club is an original podcast from Transmitter Media. The podcast...
All right, I'm going to leave it there. The playing with food bit, oh man, next week is going to be interesting. On her journal prompt, the rules that I would like to set with my family about talking about food and bodies is that when I say I'm fat, don't correct me. And I don't mean that in a fat is a neutral term sort of thing. I mean it kind of is, and I mean it that way. Like, I am fat and I need to lose weight. I am technically obese, and they get so upset when I say that, when I'm like denying the food. Oh, here's a nice rule that I'd like to have for my family. If I say no thank you, don't say are you sure and push the food back toward me. How about that? Yes, I'm sure. I do not want the food. Thank you. Also, it's not talking so much, but I would like my family to stop bringing cookies in the house. That'd be great. No more cookies in the house, please. I'd like to, just have, if I want something, I can go out, I can get a single serving, come back. Someone actually said that that's how they do it, too. I don't do it that way. Oh man, I wish I could remember your name. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, that's my ideal way of how to do it, but because I live in a house with several other people in the house, like, that's not the way I can do it. And the two elderly people, or the two elderly family members that I care for, fucking love carbs and sweets to the point where when we first moved in, I ended up eating a lot like them, and I felt fucking sick. I don't know how they live like that. Like, it's pasta, then cookies, then donut. Like, it's carbs, and more carbs and sugar. Now, and because they're older and they're actually plenty thin, they don't eat that much, so I end up eating like a good portion of it, and I just want people to stop ordering sweets. I just want people to stop ordering sweets. That's the rule that I would like to set. Please stop ordering sweets. What rules would you set? Anyway, that's the video for this week. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.